So it's 10 a.m. in Bishkek.
12 soon.
12.
Yeah, with all the time changes, it's a bit confusing, but because you guys changed on the weekend too, right? So did we. So it's +5 now for us, +6 for you.
You share. Yeah. So as long as I have this open, I can't see any comments and stuff. Or I can see the Q&A, but I can't kind of go to Attendify, but that's just now. So
Maybe Alt-Tab. If you
Here's Kuban.
Hi, Kuban.
Oh, hi.
So for all of you joining us now, we're just waiting for people to join before we start up the presentations. So for all of you who are joining us now, we're just waiting a few more minutes before we start to get more participants to join, and then we'll start the meeting in a few minutes. So I can put you to talk. Okay, so now we're 7:30. Can everybody hear me fine? Perfect. So good morning from Sweden, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. And welcome to today's meeting about enhanced landscape benefits from snow leopard and conservation, or snow leopard and Pallas cat conservation. So my name is Emma Nygren, and I'm the project coordinator for PICA, or Pallas Cat International Conservation Alliance. For those of you who don't know PICA, we are a project dedicated to Pallas cat conservation. Oh, sorry, we hear a voice in the background. I think it's a second device. It seems like you're not hearing me really well, so I will put on my mic and see if that works better. Sorry for that. So I hope you hear me better now. Sounds better? Okay, then I'll continue. So if you didn't hear me, my name is Emma Nygren. I'm the project coordinator for Pallas Cat International Conservation Alliance, or PICA in short. For those of you who don't know PICA, we are a project dedicated to Pallas cat conservation on a global scale. We are a partnership between Nordensk in Sweden, the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, and Snow Leopard Trust. And we have funding from Foundation Sigre. And we are so happy and so excited to have the opportunity to present at this forum today. During the past week and also during this week, there will be lots of great talks about the amazing snow leopard. But today we wish to focus on another member of the cat family, a species that share much of its habitat with the snow leopard, namely the Pallas cat. So during today's talk, we want to talk about this little guy and focus about the kind of benefits that we see with both snow leopard and Pallas cat conservation, and the synergetic impacts that snow leopards and Pallas cat can have in the ecosystem. So today's session will be divided into 3 parts. The presentations today will be given to you by my fellow colleagues in the PICA team. So you will first get to know the Pallas cat in a meet the species session, and that will be given to you by Kasia. And then there will be a presentation done by David Barkley about global and regional conservation efforts to date. And finally, a presentation by Gustav Samelius about the global conservation efforts going forward. And each presentation will take approximately 10 to 15 minutes. And after the presentations are finished, we really want to hear from you and have a discussion. So there will be time for questions and discussions towards the end. I will be moderating this session. So please, if you have any questions throughout the presentations, just write them in the commentary session or the commentary section. And we will make sure to answer all the questions by the end of the presentations. And before I give over the mic to our first presenter, which is Kasia, we wish to share with you a video that we have made for this GSLEP meeting. So now I'll just have to switch my screens and hope the technology is with me. So here we go. Of course, it's not with me. 2 seconds, we'll do that instead. So I'll just have to find the video. There you go. Let's see if I can share it with you. Here we go. Okay, so here comes a short video.
This is a Pallas's cat. Also known as the manul, these small cats live throughout the steppes and mountain grasslands of Central Asia. This unique species has a very distinctive look. With its short legs, stocky compact body and long fur, it is perfectly adapted to the cold winter conditions that are typical of its mountainous habitat. The Pallas's cat relies heavily on pikas, a small hair-like animal which makes up around 50% of its diet. The other half consists of small mammals like marmots and birds. The elusive Pallas's cat has very specific habitat requirements, and this makes it an important indicator of ecosystem health. However, it is this reliance on specific conditions that also makes the Pallas's cat vulnerable to a range of threats. And even though the species is not at imminent risk of extinction globally, its distribution is fragmented, and local populations are often small, isolated, and in decline.
The threats to the Pallas's cat come from habitat degradation and fragmentation, infrastructure development, but also predation from dogs or accidental trapping. A lack of awareness for the Pallas's cat is also a problem and hinders effective conservation efforts and management. Collaborative and transnational research and conservation efforts are therefore vital for safeguarding the Pallas's cat. And this amazing small cat species is also a critical component of the unique biodiversity of the landscapes of Central Asia.
The Pallas's cat shares the same mountain habitats with the snow leopard, and sadly the two species face similar threats. Consequently, the methods and benefits of addressing pressures affecting snow leopards in their fragile habitats will be easily extended to the Pallas's cat, and vice versa.
Snow leopards and Pallas cats. These are both good indicators of the health of the mountain ecosystems. As the top predators, a stable population of the snow leopards means the good numbers of large wild mammals, and the stable population of Pallas cats indicates an abundance of the small prey species.
By extending GSLEP to advocate for the Pallas's cat, the programme will not only protect the health and functioning of these fragile mountain ecosystems, but will also safeguard a number of additional species that fall under the wings of these two indicator species. Pallas's cats in your country need help. Will you be an ambassador for this charismatic cat?
So with that, I want to hand over the mic to Kasia. So Kasia is joining us from Scotland. She works at the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland and is here to present the species for us today. So Kasia, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Give me just 2 seconds to set up here. Okay, sorry for the delay there. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So as Emma mentioned, I will be talking to you a little bit more about the Pallas's cats. You had a brief introduction there in the video, but in this segment, I will tell you some more about this very unique and elusive species. So this distinctive looking cat is the Pallas's cat, also known as manul. It is a small wildcat that occurs throughout the steppes and mountains of Central Asia. And if you weren't familiar with the species before today, I wouldn't blame you, because it is a very rare, very secretive animal and very little known even within the range countries. In fact, it is amongst the least studied wildcats in the world. As a smaller, lesser known cousin of the snow leopard, the Pallas cat is also known as the small ghost of the mountain. Now here is just a closer look at some of the unique traits and adaptations of the Pallas cats. The Pallas cat is roughly the size of a domestic cat, but with its short legs and dense fur, it gives it a larger, stocker appearance, and it also provides excellent insulation from the cold temperatures. The tail is also very thick and has these characteristic bands. The coat is stone-colored, which together with the small round ears located on the sides provides supreme camouflage when the Pallas cat is hunting or hiding from predators. It also has these characteristic black spots on the forehead. And interestingly, its eye pupils are round, unlike the slit-shaped pupils of your domestic cat, or in fact, the majority of other cat species. These round pupils also give it a very expressive look, and Pallas cats are somewhat famous for their unique facial expressions. And all these traits together make it perfectly adapted to the high altitudes and low temperatures that are typical of its harsh habitats in the mountains and steppes of Central Asia. The Pallas cats have a wide but fragmented distribution throughout much of Central Asia. The range stretches from eastern Mongolia to western Iran. It covers a large surface area, as you can see from those numbers here, and it spans over 16 countries. The main populations are believed to occur in Mongolia and China, and the distribution becomes progressively scattered and isolated towards the southwest of the range. Finally, 12 out of the 16 Pallas cat range countries are overlapping with the snow leopard range countries, as you can see on the map here, as well as on the close-up of the same map. So in the dark blue, we have the snow leopard distribution range, and the light blue, we have the Pallas cat range. And at the bottom, there is a list of all the Pallas cat range countries, including the ones where Pallas cats co-occur with the snow leopard, as well as additional 4 Pallas cat range countries, which are Armenia, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkmenistan. In terms of species status, it is currently classified as a species of least concern on the IUCN Red List of threatened species. For those of you who may not be too familiar with the IUCN Red List, at the top there, we have all the categories that the species can be classified as based on their extinction risk. So going from the right, we have least concern category, then near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and extinct. And those 3 categories here are the higher risk categories. So Pallas cats as the least concerned species currently doesn't fall under those higher risk categories. And so it isn't likely to go globally extinct in the near future. However, while the large distribution provides some security against extinction on a global scale for the Pallas cat, at local scale, many populations are small, isolated, and in decline. And the species is currently not included under any national or regional management plans. There's also a degree of variation and uncertainty regarding the local status of Pallas cats, which tends to vary per country. So it is considered extinct in Armenia and Azerbaijan, endangered in China, Turkmenistan, near threatened in Mongolia, Pakistan, and Kyrgyzstan, data deficient, meaning there isn't enough data to assess its status in Nepal, and the Pallas cat status is still unclear in some of the range countries, such as Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. So even though the global extinction of the Pallas cats is unlikely in the short term, of more concern is the fact that the species may become regionally and locally extinct. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more background on Pallas cat ecology and behavior. One important thing to know about the Pallas cats is that they are habitat and diet specialists, which means they are very selective when it comes to their choices of resources. In terms of habitat, that means that Pallas cats tend to select areas that can provide them with good cover. Very often those are rocky areas, sometimes shrub steppes or hill slopes. The Pallas cats also rely very heavily on burrows and dens, which are used daily as cover from predators, but also for feeding, giving birth, raising young, and thermoregulation in the cold temperatures. Now, given that predation is the leading cause of Pallas cat mortality in the wild, and with the range of predators that the Pallas cat has, such as red fox, gray wolf, large raptors, domestic dogs, as well as humans, it makes sense that it would want to hide. The Pallas cats can also be found at high altitudes. The highest record to date comes from 5,593 meters. As I mentioned, they are also diet specialists, which means they have high preference for pika over other prey animals. Pika are those small hair-like animals you've seen in the video earlier, and they make up around 50% of its diet. The rest of the diet is made up of other small mammals, such as gerbils or voles, occasionally young marmots, and small birds. They're also known to eat an occasional berry and have been documented to predate on Argali lambs. Majority of activity for Pallas cats occurs at dawn and dusk. This allows them to avoid the times when their predators are active, while at the same time overlapping their activity with that of its prey, which then maximizes their hunting success. However, they can also be active during the day and have been known to hunt during the day, especially when the temperatures are at their lowest. So in this graph here, we have some preliminary results of a study looking at activity patterns of the Pallas cat. And we can see some activity around dusk, but also there is a little burst of activity during daytime hours. Similarly to many other cats, Pallas cats are solitary, and males generally only meet females during the mating season. They communicate using scent marking, but are also known to vocalize during the breeding season especially, and they have this strange sounding call, kind of like a goose, that you heard at the start of the video as well. They have large home ranges relative to their size, with females averaging at 25 square kilometers and males averaging at 100 square kilometers. And Pallas cats also occur at very low densities, estimated at between 2 to 6 cats per 100 kilometers square. And this is presumed to be partially a result of predation, as well as perhaps their specific habitat requirements that we discussed earlier. Reproduction is seasonal for Pallas cats, and the females can give birth to up to 8 kittens, who then disperse at 4 to 5 months of age. And Pallas cats in captivity can live up to 12 years, but in the wild, it is up to 6 years. Another important thing to know about Pallas cats is that certain aspects of their ecology that we just discussed also make it naturally vulnerable to threats. So for example, its very specific habitat requirements and low densities means that they are very vulnerable to any changes in land use, which are generally increasing across the range. Their reliance on dens and burrows, which are critical resources, also mean that they can be additionally threatened by any declines in those burrowing mammals. Their high preference for pikas means that they are also very sensitive to any fluctuations in numbers or availability of those particular animals, as opposed to other prey items. And their wide-ranging behavior puts them at increased contact with humans and any associated disturbances, which also increases their chances of human-induced mortality. Finally, this overlap with humans also means that their ranges might be difficult to cover by protected areas. As mentioned before, there is a high degree of overlap between the ranges of the snow leopard and Pallas cat, and therefore the species share a lot of the same habitats. In fact, these two pictures of the Pallas cat and the snow leopard are taken at the exact same spot, only at a different time of the day, which you can maybe tell by the landscape in the background. And so as a result of the two cats sharing the same habitats, they also often face very similar threats. Sorry. Now, the main threats to the Pallas cats are considered to be habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation, largely due to expansion of agriculture, infrastructure, and resource extraction. Predation from domestic dogs is also a significant cause of mortality and poses a major threat. The Pallas cats can also fall prey to accidental trapping when catching other animals, and loss of prey base, mainly due to poisoning campaigns, are also thought to impact local populations and can also lead to secondary poisoning of the cats themselves. The legal and illegal hunting also continue to be an issue for the species, and effects of climate change and disease are expected to worsen in the future. An ability to effectively monitor the species across the range also means that it may be declining locally without our knowledge. And finally, gaps in knowledge and awareness of the species pose an additional threat, which brings me to this brief overview of the state of awareness and research on the Pallas cat to date. In general, awareness of the Pallas cat is very poor, even within the range countries. And this graph here shows results of a study that was conducted across range countries, which asked local inhabitants to identify the Pallas cat from a photograph against photographs of other small cat species. And as you can see, less than 50% were able to correctly identify the Pallas cat from a photograph, which emphasizes that even local communities living alongside the Pallas cat have a poor understanding of what they are or even what they look like, let alone people living outside the range countries. Of all wild cats, the Pallas cat has also been identified as one of the most severely understudied species, and it has received very little research and conservation attention to date. And even though our knowledge of the Pallas cat has increased substantially over the past decade, there are still significant gaps in our understanding of Pallas cat ecology, population dynamics, and how the local populations may respond to threats, particularly those lesser known populations in the southwest of the range. The species also suffers from a shortage of funding for research and conservation. And so taken together, those gaps in knowledge and awareness pose a major challenge to conservation of the Pallas cat as they hinder the development of effective and targeted conservation action. So just to summarize, the Pallas cat is a very unique, very elusive, and little-known species that still remains somewhat of a mystery. However, it is a crucial component of the unique biodiversity of Central Asian landscapes. And as a mid-level predator, it also has important ecological roles to play that complement those of the snow leopards in the shared ecosystem. Due to the very specific habitat and dietary requirements of the Pallas cat, it is also an important indicator species of ecosystem health. However, those very same traits also make it very susceptible to any disturbance in its environment. And so while the Pallas cat is unlikely to go globally extinct in the near future, it is still at risk of regional and local extinction. And finally, since the Pallas cat shares a large proportion of its range with the snow leopard, the two cats often face similar threats. And so joint conservation efforts on these two cats can result in synergetic impacts for the snow leopards, the Pallas cats, as well as their mountain ecosystems as a whole. And now I will pass on to David and Gustav, who will tell you a little more about the conservation journey of the Pallas cat, what has been done to date, and efforts going forward. Thank you.
So thank you, Kasia, for that great presentation. And now we know everything about the Pallas cats that we need to know. So now it's time to hand over the mic to David Barclay, who also works at the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. And he will share a bit more about what's been done in the conservation of the species to date. So David, please. So David, you're still on mute. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Kasia. Great to have such a detailed insight into this fantastic small cat species. So good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. As Emma mentioned, I'm talking to Scotland, so very early morning here. But it's a pleasure to be with you all, and I hope you've had a fantastic week so far, and look forward to the remainder of the conference and enjoy lots of insights and information regarding snow leopard and today for the Pallas cat. I'm going to give a sort of short overview of the work that's been done so far by both the project, our project PICA, and some of the other efforts relating to Pallas cats, for example, the Pallas cat working group, and just how this has shaped our approach for the next few years with regards to Pallas cat conservation. So I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of an introduction to the sort of collection of specialists that have been working together over the last few years for Pallas cat research and conservation. The Pallas cat working group was established in 2012 and brought together a large number of species specialists, researchers, conservation enthusiasts, or even people from outside the range countries of Central Asia that perhaps worked in funding organizations or even the zoological institutions where myself and Kasia are based. And it really allowed people to come together to share information, to share different thoughts or recommendations about projects or techniques whilst carrying out conservation or research work across the range countries for the Pallas cat. This group has developed over the last 8 years. It's currently coordinated by Anna Barashkova and is supported by a number of projects working and dedicated to the conservation and research of the Pallas cat. Anna currently chairs the working group, and it's been really a key source of information and conservation approaches and designs for specific targeted research. So this is it's a group that as a project we've connected with quite closely over the last few years. It gives us a quick and direct access to key people working across the many Pallas cat range countries, most of which are actually represented in the working group. There's one or two which are still to be represented, but most of the Pallas cat range and key individuals from those countries are working within the group. So it's a fantastic tool and resource to have available. Now, as Emma has mentioned already, we are representing the PICA project, which is the Pallas Cat International Conservation Alliance. And our project started back in 2016 when myself and Emma and Gustav, who were connected already for different reasons, started to discuss a potential new project to support global efforts in Pallas cat research and conservation. Both myself and Emma work within the zoological environment here in Europe. We are obviously well connected with many other zoological institutions in North America and across Asia, and the population of zoos in Japan as well, all of which, or some of which rather, actually house Pallas cats. And in that environment, we also have a dedicated breeding program, which I have coordinated over the last 10 years. And again, that's another network that brings together many of the key individuals that care for Pallas cats, that are active in fundraising for Pallas cats, and those that are committed to support field conservation and research. Obviously, we're absolutely privileged and delighted to have been working so closely with the Snow Leopard Trust that is represented by Gustav. And that's been an incredible partnership because, of course, as Kasia has already mentioned, the relationships and the synergies between Pallas cats and snow leopard are somewhat obvious. They share most of their range together. And the snow leopard, of course, is an incredible flagship species for the habitats and the landscapes and other species of Central Asia. So to connect both species or to connect projects working for both species to help benefit the conservation of both seemed rather obvious. And it's been a fantastic tool to be able to sort of use the snow leopard as somewhat of a vehicle to support and increase the awareness for the lesser known species called the Pallas cat. So as Emma mentioned, we established and officially formed the project in 2016 between the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, Nordens Ark of Sweden, and the Snow Leopard Trust. We were grateful to receive some funding from Foundation Segre, and we've built up a number of key relationships and partnerships within the project since 2016. We've been delighted to work very closely with the IUCN Cat Specialist Group, with the Pallas Cat Working Group, and then with a large number of key researchers working in range countries across the field. And really the main focus of the project was to provide resources, provide support, and increase capacity for conservation and research of the species across the range countries. All of us in the project here are working out with the Pallas cat range, but there's still a great deal that we can do to support key individuals working in Pallas cat range countries. And that was really the focus of our work, was to spread awareness and spread information of this incredible cat across Europe, across North America, across the world, and draw more attention to it. And by doing so, hopefully increase the funding that is available for the Pallas cat, so that we can then give that back to some of the key projects, or even create some of our own key actions to help support Pallas cat efforts. So Gustav may also touch on some of the key work and key activities that we've been involved in over the last few years. And of course, we have been thankful to have received a second funding grant from Foundation Segre. So we will be continuing this project for another 3 years, and Gustav will give you an update on some of the exciting work that we'll be moving into. Just before I finish, I just wanted to touch on one very important objective that we set out a number of years ago at the start of the first phase of the PICA project, PICA 1. And that objective was to collaborate with the IUCN and specialist groups and Pallas cat specialists across the range to help coordinate either the first global action plan or a conservation plan for the species. This is something that has not been done already for Pallas cat, and would really be a fantastic tool to help guide more targeted conservation over the coming years. So together with the IUCN Cat Specialist Group, in 2018, we actually established the first ever species status review of Pallas cat and the first ever global conservation strategy. This is obviously a huge amount of work. It's a process and approach taken by the IUCN Cat Specialist Group really is one of the founding steps of a longer term conservation approach for many other species. But it's the first ever status review of a small cat species, and it is the first conservation strategy for the Pallas cat that's been brought together by many of the leading experts in the species from as many of the range countries as possible. This publication was included as a special issue of the IUCN Cat Specialist News publication, the Cat News publication, so is available, and we do have access to this. So if anybody would like to receive a copy or learn more about it in a bit more detail, then feel free to contact any of us or Emma, who will leave her contact email address in the chat. But this status review, like I say, was an extensive piece of work, but allowed us for the first time really to pull as much of the new data and evidence of Pallas cat threats, of Pallas cat distribution, of Pallas cat conservation efforts, looking at a lot of the historical data, and looking at new surveys where we could actually engage with many of the researchers working across the Pallas cat range. And it brings together a really thorough assessment of the species, both from an ecological perspective, but also from a conservation and threat perspective. And as Kasia pointed out in her presentation, the Pallas cat at a global level is documented as least concern. However, for the Pallas cat, and the same can be said for many other small cat species, we're still missing a lot of information. There's a lot of research that has yet to be conducted. So a lot of the conclusions that we draw currently about population status are often based on very limited information. And this is why it's really critical that we continue to have effective conservation strategies in place for species like the Pallas cat, and clearly working together with GSLET, working together with the Snow Leopard Trust, and working together with other researchers working with the snow leopard is a very clear and obvious relationship that we're very keen to build on, because the efforts for one species to the other are incredibly beneficial and synergistic. So this is, like I say, a project that we've been really delighted to participate in and to develop over the last few years. And we feel that the status review and the new conservation strategy, which we'll speak about in a little bit more in just a few moments, have been incredible tools to help direct conservation for this incredible species. I am going to pass over to Gustav now, who will touch on what the future looks like for both the project and perhaps how we can use the conservation strategy to guide new studies. So thank you, and over to you, Gustav.
Well, thank you, David. That's excellent. That's excellent. So I'm going to continue here soon, and I'm going to share my screen. Good. Okay, hopefully you guys can see my screen now. And so I'm going to be talking about global conservation efforts going forward. David has talked about global conservation efforts to date. Before I do that, though, I just want to sort of pick up on what Emma, Kasia, and David has already said, that it's really a pleasure to be able to meet with you guys here and talk about conservation for these small and unstudied species and species that usually don't get a lot of attention. So it's really a pleasure that we can meet and discuss how we can all together do more conservation work for the Pallas cats. And I also want to thank really, or all of us really want to thank GSLEP for allowing us to sort of come along with the snow leopards and talk about another species. And that's just so nice. A very nice gesture by GSLEP, and also shows how GSLEP is having a really nice and wide objective of, so it's not just snow leopards, it's the ecosystem at large. That's what GSLEP are working for as well. So with that, it's very nice to be able to be talking to you here today. So, okay, back to my presentation then. I'm going to be talking about global conservation efforts going forward. And, oops, did I see it there? David was talking about PICA and the Pallas Cat International Conservation Alliance that was formed in 2015. And we have just recently got a second edition of funding. So we are really happy to be able to work at least another 3 years forward and continue our efforts towards facilitating and supporting and coordinating global conservation efforts. And while we have lots of different objectives, of course, there's two really important goals for us for the next 3 years, and as far as global conservation efforts. And the first one is, David was telling you how about 8 years or so ago, the Pallas Cat Working Group was established. And it's been mostly regional so far, as they was saying. Most of the efforts of that network has been done in the northern region of the distribution of the Pallas cat. And during that meeting, when 4D specialists met in Sweden to develop the global conservation strategy, one of the things we discussed a lot was that it's important to expand or develop the Pallas Cat Working Group to cover the whole range. And really, when we talk about Pallas cats, we really talk about 3 different areas: the northern range, the southwestern range, and the southeastern range. So include these 2 southern parts of the distribution as well. So we're working very closely with the Pallas Cat Working Group and Anna Barashkova in expanding the network of specialists to cover the whole range of the species distribution. Now, the Pallas Cat Working Group is mostly researchers, a network of researchers and specialists. So another important aspect is to be able then to connect that global conservation strategy that all these specialists put together a couple of years or 2 years ago, to collect that with policymakers throughout the range. So going, from specialists, having this knowledge of what needs to be done, and connect that with policymakers throughout the range. That is a very, very important objective for us during the next 3 years. And that might sound easy, or not easy, but the obvious question is then, how do you do that? And that is really why we're meeting here today. And we think that GSLEP is an ideal organization for connecting the global conservation strategy with the policymakers. And why do we think that? Well, Kasia was telling you that Pallas cats and snow leopards, they share similar habitats, they share similar distribution, and they share similar threats. And we've all sort of said or iterated during our talks that conservation efforts on one species will gain the other. So conservations on snow leopards will gain Pallas cats, and conservation efforts on Pallas cats will gain snow leopards. And the other thing also is that what Kasia was telling you as well is that both snow leopards and Pallas cats are indicators of ecosystem health, but for different species, for different parts of the ecosystem. The snow leopards are good indicators of health of this part of the system that builds on large prey. And then Pallas cats are good indicators of ecosystem health of the part of the ecosystem that builds on small prey. So if we have both of these species in the system, we have really good indication that yes, the whole ecosystem is doing well. So advocating them for both snow leopards and Pallas cats, it will benefit both species, of course, but also it will benefit the whole mountain ecosystem at large. And the objective of this meeting then, that is to introduce to you the idea of GSLEP advocating for the Pallas cat and stressing the synergetic effects of the joint conservation efforts for Pallas cat, for snow leopards, and for the ecosystem. And we know that this will take a bit of time. It's not, you know, we have a meeting today and this is all done. It's something that we will continue to work with, but sort of really the main objective today is just bring the idea up on the table, you know, put the Pallas cat on the table, introduce you to the idea that why do we have to worry about Pallas cats? Why worry about them? Why worry about their conservation? And then stress these synergetic or win-win effects that we get from sort of co-managing these two species. And that those are synergetic or win-win effects on the whole ecosystem. The other thing that we want to do today here is get your feedback and your ideas on what you think of GSLEP advocating for the Pallas cats. So what are the benefits of doing this? And of course, what are the challenges of doing so? And another thing that we want to do today, although perhaps not an official objective, but it's to let you know that there is a lot of material available. Like for instance, the status review, which is a collection of knowledge of the species today, plus that in that status review, we also have the global conservation strategy. There is also other material available that I think we will get back to during the discussion, share a little bit more about what's material is available. But we've talked now for about an hour, so right now we want to switch into the question session of this meeting and get your feedback then on what you think about GSLEP advocating for the Pallas cats. What are the benefits and what are the challenges? And I'm going to hand over to Emma, but before I do that, I'm just going to leave the last slide here open for a little bit to sort of spark ideas for you about what type of questions or what type of information we would love to get your feedback on. And of course, you know, any other questions that you may have are more than welcome, of course. But some of the questions that we are then really interested in hearing more from you about are, what are the main challenges for Pallas cats conservation in your country? And what support would help to incorporate Pallas cats in national conservation efforts? Like Kasia was saying before, today there are no national management plans that are including the Pallas cat. So how can we help policymakers and managers do that? What type of information, what type of support would they need to be able to include the Pallas cats in national management plans? And then, of course, what are the values or the benefits of including the Pallas cat in national conservation plans? So with that, Emma, I'm just going to leave this slide on for a little bit, and then I'm going to pass over to you to start leading the discussion.
Thank you, Gustav, and thank you, David, for that presentation, for giving us an insight what's have been done in Pallas cat conservation, and of course sharing our kind of why we are doing this presentation today at the GSLEP meeting. So we have a few questions, but I just want to, so the questions that we asked, that Gustav had here on the slide, we would love to hear your thoughts on this. Please either write your answers in the chat or in the Q&A, or if you want to as well, you could raise your hand. There should be available, so you could kind of raise your hand and we could put on your mic so you can ask the questions live, so to say. So we have a question here regarding the status of the Pallas cat. So as Kasia was saying, it is listed as least concern. But the question is, how well do we know the status of the Pallas cat to be able to call it least concern? And I was thinking, David, maybe you could answer this, since you've been involved in the updated red list of the Pallas cat.
Sure. Well, thank you for to whoever submitted the question, because I think this is a really important one. And I think in terms of the red listing and the global status is also one that sometimes people can misinterpret. You know, they can look at the status of a species, and depending on whether it says least concern, vulnerable, or endangered or critically endangered, they then prioritize or they justify whether or not conservation efforts should be developed or continued. And that's not really the main purpose of the red list. The red list is there to help try and guide us, to help highlight some of the gaps that we have with species knowledge and species conservation. For many of the species on the red list where there's a lot of data missing, whether they're a very understudied species or just incredibly elusive, where getting the information is very challenging, then it's very difficult to have very detailed assessments on their global status. So for many of the small cats, Pallas's cat included, this tends to be the case where they still want to come up with some conclusion on what the global status should be for that species, but they're doing it with quite limited information. In the case of the Pallas's cat, there was actually a recent assessment carried out by the IUCN Red List just in the last few months, and we had the opportunity to use a lot of the data that we collected for the Pallas cat status review, and again, going back to that status review, it shows the benefit of that process, because it was really a culmination of all of the most extensive research and evidence and data and sightings and studies that had been carried out on the species, and that was a really important tool in guiding the new red list assessment process. So it's very as much as we have that IUCN assessment, if you read it, you will quickly pick up on the fact that there's still lots of information that we're missing. And despite the categorization of least concern, it does not mean that we do not need to carry out any conservation efforts. In fact, if anything, it encourages the need for more conservation and research in specific areas of the species range or in various ecological studies of the species. And this is also another sort of reason why the conservation strategy that was developed at the same time as the status review was so important, because that allowed us to identify and document this priority list of actions and objectives in terms of Pallas's cat conservation and research, and why they are needed for us to improve our knowledge of the species. And you know, in terms of conservation of any species, we can only conserve something when we have good information about it, when we know something about that species. It's very difficult to implement effective conservation strategies if we don't know where the species is, if we don't know what the status of the population is, and also in terms of education and awareness, it's important that people living in the countries of the Pallas's cat know what the species is and are aware of their role in the environment. So these are all areas that we've tried to focus on with the PICA project. But really, just to summarize, the species is listed as least concern, but there's still lots of information missing about the Pallas's cat, and it's still really important that we continue to develop and maintain good conservation and research actions over the coming years.
Thank you, David, for that extensive reply. Another question here is about so is it known or hypothesized what diseases specifically might be a threat to the Pallas cats? So I know maybe David or Gustav could answer that question. David, you have an insight on the situation within the captive population and the diseases we have there. And Gustav, maybe you can kind of talk a bit more about the diseases for the wild population.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll take this quickly. This won't be as a detailed or as an extensive an answer, because this is one of the areas where we're lacking quite a lot of information from across the Pallas cat range. What we know, and this is one of the benefits from having and managing Pallas's cats in the captive environment, is that we can actually learn some things that perhaps we didn't know about things like disease. And I can say that from captive populations, one of the biggest challenges for Pallas's cats is toxoplasmosis. They're incredibly susceptible to this parasite, and it has a very high mortality rate in captivity. It tends to affect kittens, the survival rate of kittens, but can also affect old or young or weak cats whose immune system has been suppressed for some reason. There have been studies carried out in the wild, particularly in Mongolia, that have looked at disease prevalence of wild populations, and they actually found that toxoplasmosis was not such a big threat. I think it was only found in around 13% of the sample cats in the wild. So we know that there are differences clearly between what's happening in the wild and what's happening in captivity, but we still have the ability to learn from these captive populations. There has been some studies looking at disease prevalence in various populations, but there's still lots of gaps in our knowledge of disease issues in Pallas cats in the wild. Of course, there are the sort of typical feline viruses, which can often be transmitted from domestic or feral cats, for example, panleukopenia or herpes virus. So these have been, these are sort of an ongoing cause of concern for Pallas's cats. But suffice to say, this is an area of work that we greatly benefit from more support and more dedicated studies over the coming years. Gustav, is there anything you would like to say about snow leopards?
Yeah, or maybe I'll just add a little bit, like you were saying, there has been a few studies in the wild, not a lot, but like you were saying, there's that one study in Mongolia, and our friends and colleagues in Russia are doing some work. And I should perhaps also say, in general, there are some in Central Asia, there are some really nasty diseases. We have anthrax there, we have rabies there, and we have plague. They're extremely dangerous, and both for humans and for animals. And if you get that disease, the animals will more or less just vanish. And then you have, like you said, toxoplasma, which is a really important or potentially dangerous disease for snow leopards and then also for Pallas cats. And like you said, all the thing when we do the studies in the wild is that we catch the animals that survive. So it's difficult to say how dangerous it is. We know in captivity, like you said, it's really a lot of animals that are dying from toxoplasma, and especially the young ones. So we don't know when we catch a wild animal. We are looking at the antibodies. Those are the animals that survived. So what are the animals that actually didn't survive in the wild? So, like you were saying, David, it's nice to have that we can do studies both in the wild and in captivity, and we will learn together. And there hasn't been done a lot of disease work in general in these areas. Not in the Pallas cat and not in snow leopards either. There are a few studies coming out with snow leopards. And like I was saying, of course, these really dangerous diseases, we won't see the antibodies to anthrax, we won't see the antibodies to rabies and plague, because the animals have died before we get them. But for their larger cousins than the snow leopards, they had a few viruses that we saw that. And going through the pandemics that we're doing today, it's interesting to note that in a study in Mongolia on snow leopards, the snow leopards there had coronavirus. It's a different corona than what we are suffering of today, but there is another strain or another variety of corona that's there. They also had bacterial diseases such as leptospira, which is not as high morbidity as some of these dangers, but there are a lot of diseases out there. But again, definitely need more studies. And like a lot of the other work in Pallas cats, a lot of the work has been done either in Russia or Kazakhstan and in Mongolia. So there's a lot of need of information from other areas. I think I leave it at that. Yeah. So we need to learn a lot more, but there are some nasty diseases out there.
Yeah. Thank you. So we have another question here regarding what role do we, the panelists, think GSLEP or similar platforms with governments on board can play in Pallas cat conservation? So I don't know if you want to continue there, Gustav, and we can add on.
Yeah. And like Kasia was bringing up, as it is today, the Pallas cat is not included in any national plan of any of the range countries. So, we understand that, there are limited funds and managers, you have to decide where to put your effort. But if we can co-manage ecosystem and co-manage the species, we will have this joint effort. So if we, there is a fair bit of attention, a fair bit of work on snow leopards now. If we can then lift in that, parallel to the snow leopards, we have these other cats. And by expanding our work just a little bit and increase our awareness of the species and the conservation needs, then we can gain so much more. And that's actually going to benefit the snow leopard as well as the Pallas cat. Like as a manager, I can say, yes, we're working with snow leopards, while doing so, we're benefiting in the whole ecosystem, and also we're advocating also for this other smaller cousin to the snow leopard. And, while looking at snow leopards, that's a good indication of one part of the ecosystem being healthy and in function. By including this other small cousin, we have another top predator that if we have that top predator there as well, then we know that that other half of the ecosystem is doing well. So I think there are challenges, of course. Everybody wants, or a lot of people, of course, are saying there's a lot of different species that are calling for attention, and that's true. And so why these species? Well, they're good indicators of the ecosystem health, I would say. That's what I would say. And there is a lot of need for conservation work on these species. Just lifting it up on the table and saying, okay, hey, we have these species here. It's not even on any of the management plans so far. So there is a huge need to just raise the awareness, raise the issue of the threats they're facing, and start to act on those. And when we're acting on those, we know that, okay, this is going to have sort of effects on other parts of the ecosystem as well. And yeah, I'll pass over to the rest of the team and to build on that.
Yeah, I think maybe just because it's a kind of question who leads into the same topic. So other than funds, what can a consortium for Pallas Cat do that an existing network such as the GSLEP program doesn't? In other words, are there elements that should be added to the GSLEP program goals that might be missing and may help provide a more holistic conservation approach covering Pallas Cat within its aegis? So I don't know, David, do you want to kind of continue?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll sort of try and answer the current question and perhaps build on what Gustav was addressing also. I think one of the sort of longer term objectives is for conservation of Pallas's cats to become sort of self-sustaining. Of course, as a project, we're delighted that we can access funding and that we can use that funding to implement targeted actions and support conservation projects across the range. However, that may come to an end at some point in the future, and funding for many of the small cats is always very precarious. So it would be to the benefit of the species if regional or national action plans or landscape management plans could sort of endorse a species and could adopt it so that the conservation becomes more sort of ingrained and intertwined with the sort of ongoing management plans of that country. So I think from that perspective, it would be hugely beneficial, and would sort of take a little bit of the pressure off the sort of the need to always find funding for the conservation of the species. Of course, there will always be other research and dedicated projects that we need to put money into. But if from a national perspective that the Pallas's cat is sort of adopted into environmental plans or habitat or landscape plans or biodiversity plans, then that would be a really great achievement. And just to sort of also touch on sort of perhaps some of the things that are missing a little bit, and that is something that was sort of indicated from some of the work that we did a couple of years ago with regards to education and awareness. We carried out a survey looking at the sort of knowledge of or understanding of people living across the range countries with regards to Pallas's cats. And at a very simple level, we found that under half the people living alongside Pallas's cats in the communities and that had professions that they would maybe come into contact with the Pallas cat habitat or populations, we found that under half the people knew what a Pallas's cat was. And this goes back to that very simple situation where how do you conserve something if nobody knows anything about it? So I think education and awareness of the Pallas cat is really important. And to be perfectly honest, when you have such an incredible species like the snow leopard and so many benefits extending from the conservation and research of that species to so many others, that one should not be overly challenging, and it shouldn't be something that is always dependent on funding. So simply improving the awareness of the Pallas's cat is really important. And also another action that's incorporated into the conservation strategy and that would be really beneficial for different countries and different borders working across the Pallas cat snow leopard range, and really sort of highlighting the importance of that sort of transnational landscape approach is training, is capacity building and training. So that could be training of field rangers, of researchers working in the environment, working with other species, or it could be border patrols. that are checking individuals or vehicles that are moving from one country to the next, or moving from one part of the country to the other. And this is something that we've had the pleasure of sort of experiencing when we were on a field trip working with Pallas cats and snow leopards in Kyrgyzstan a couple of years ago, and we could see the sort of different routes of passage throughout the country, and at times where documents need to be checked and so on. And if those individuals had perhaps more detailed training on identification of Pallas cats, both from either their body parts or just being able to identify field signs of a Pallas cat, then that could be really helpful in understanding where Pallas cats are in some of those countries, perhaps even if it's within the known range, or perhaps more interestingly out with the known range for the species in that country. So I think that's just a few examples of where there could be very positive relationships between platforms like GSLEP and projects like ours, or the wider network within the Pallas Cat Working Group. And is quite rightly pointed out by the question, it's not always dependent on funding. There's many other benefits and actions that can be implemented that don't need to cost that much money.
Thank you, David. We have had a suggestion here, or we asked the question, what support would help to incorporate the Pallas cat in national conservation efforts? And one suggestion here from one of the attendees is that either IUCN or PICA or both could help in national red list assessments of the Pallas cats country-wise and get it endorsed by the cat specialist group. And this could help in fundraising for projects in country where the species is data deficient or threatened. So I think that is a really valuable suggestion that we will take with us going forward with this work. We have another question here. Which areas of research do you think would be most urgently addressed? Is it distribution, population number, genetic diversity? I don't know. Who feels like, Gustav, are you up for answering that questions?
I can start and you guys fill in. And I think one of the things that we were discussing there 2 years ago at the global meeting when we developed the conservation strategy was definitely distribution was one of the things that we were mentioning. We'll start with that. Just knowing where we have the animals, that should be the first start. Then of course later on building on densities and these things and numbers, but that's even more challenging to estimate population numbers for the Pallas cats. That the snow leopards have these distinct pelt patterns. They're easier to do population assessments and density estimates of the snow leopards that have a more distinct, unique individual pelt pattern. And we might not be there yet, but definitely the distribution is one of the things. Also, one of the things that we did talk a lot about is habitat requirements, habitat use. We know they're highly dependent on rocky terrain where they can and burrows where they can sort of find shelter from predators. Learn more about this, how strong that dependence on certain habitats are, and also get information from more of the range countries, because really, like both Kasia and David have been stressing so far, most of the work to date is done in either Mongolia or in Russia and Kazakhstan. There's very limited information from the southern part of the distribution, so the southwest and the Himalayas, very limited information. So we need to learn more there. And also, like the question was saying, genetics, how connected are these areas? If you look at the physical appearance of the cat, they tend to be more reddish in the southwest. Is that genetic? Is that showing that they are actually somewhat isolated down there? Or is that just adaptation to the local conditions there? Those are things that definitely need to be addressed more. And like the other question before, which is something that we are so much reminded of today with the pandemic, is diseases. What are the diseases and what are the effects of it? So those are some of the areas that I would say. So yeah, you guys just please continue on and build on that.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying there, it really differs also between the different areas. So in some areas, we barely know anything about the distribution. So in those countries, there should be a focus on where does the cat actually kind of exist in this area. And in other areas, you have other questions that are more urgent. So it really depends on what country, given the large range of this species, it really depends on which country we are talking about. David or Kasia, do you have anything to add about the urgent research that should be focused on for the Pallas cat?
I think you pointed out one of the sort of challenges or differences between the different range countries, and that is that most of the countries are at a different starting point in terms of what is the next step for Pallas cat research or Pallas cat conservation. As Gustav pointed out, in some of the countries like Russia, like Kazakhstan, like Mongolia, the research is a bit more advanced than what it is in other countries. There's been projects there that have been operating for 10, even up to 20 years. So our knowledge of some of those populations is much better than, say, in northern India or Pakistan or Bhutan or Iran. And as Kasia pointed out, there's countries where Pallas cats are currently thought to be extinct now. They are part of the historic range, but they're now thought to be extinct. So there's different priorities in different countries. So having a sort of one size fits all answers is very difficult. But as Gustav mentioned, some of the general biological and ecological information is really important, because without that, it then becomes very difficult to do anything beyond that. But for the countries that we do have some of that information, I think it's fair to say that we're now at a stage where we really want to try and implement some threat reduction actions as well. So in areas where we know threats exist or threats have been identified through some of the surveys that we collected for the status review, we want to try and develop strategies to mitigate those threats and implement those over the coming years. And of course, it's a huge, the Pallas cat range, like the snow leopard range, is vast. It covers many different countries, many different cultures and languages. So it's very difficult when we talk about sort of things like threat mitigation on a landscape that's so vast. And I think this is why it's so important and could be incredibly beneficial to Pallas cat conservation efforts to have the relationship with other networks and platforms like GSLEP, because above all, it gives us better access and better contacts to people in those countries, people working on the ground, from the researchers, people making political decisions that really have the potential to shape the future for the Pallas cat. So this is, of course, why we're so happy and delighted to have this forum this morning and be able to talk about the Pallas cat on such a big stage. So hopefully this relationship can help with some of these challenges and research needs in the coming years.
So just a kind of a follow-up question here is that, are there any recent studies comparing status of the Pallas cat in the past and in the present? And I guess the answer to that is also that it really depends on what country we're talking about. So in certain countries, there haven't been that many studies conducted in the past, so we don't have that much to compare with. Don't know if you have anything more to add on that.
I think you're right, Emma. I think in perhaps in Mongolia, or maybe some individual projects that have been ongoing for a number of years, they have a better idea of the historical trend in population dynamics. But I would say for almost all of the range, that's probably not possible, because if we don't have any idea on what the population status is today, then it's highly unlikely that we'll have any idea of what it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago, or anything further back. Some of the information that we can access that gives us an idea on the strength of the population is perhaps the trade in skins or trade in body parts. But even then, it's most certainly not enough to give us an accurate historical overview of the population trends.
So we have one question here. I think you have to go again there, David, because the question is, how many zoos across the world have Pallas cats, and are they also part of this alliance? And I mean, both myself and David and Kasia are directly from the zoo world, but there are many other zoos that we collaborate with as well. I don't know if you could kind of talk about the captive population just quick. And
yes, so to quickly answer the question, yes, there's many zoos across the world are supporting the PICA project. We have around, now please don't quote me on my numbers because I don't have them to hand, but there are around 35 zoos in Europe that have Pallas's cats. There's around 20 zoos in North America that have Pallas's cats, and there are around 5 zoos in Japan that have Pallas's cats. Historically, some of the key institutions have been the likes of Moscow Zoo and Novosibirsk Zoo in Russia, which are those animals are part of the European population. And of course, it's really fantastic to have zoos that are from within the Pallas cat range countries. But in terms of the PICA project, one of the great benefits of us working in the zoo world, and us many of these zoos having the species, is that we're able to educate people about a species like the Pallas cat that for many people outside of the range, so at least until a few years ago, very few people had heard of Pallas's cats, but we have the ability to increase the knowledge, increase the awareness, and really excite people about this fantastic small cat species. And we're also able to help access funding. We get funding from many of the zoos in Europe, and some funding from Japan and North America that goes directly towards the PICA project, and that allows us to then support a number of research projects across the range. So although to some it may feel like we're quite disconnected with the issues and challenges of the species across range countries, we do have the ability to have a direct impact in supporting the conservation actions and objectives.
Yeah, we can add also that also in the zoo community, we're trying to make the link between Pallas cats and snow leopards, so that we get that also in the zoo. So people who are working with the snow leopards in zoos, we're trying to get them involved in Pallas cat and Pallas cat conservation as well. So we get that kind of holistic view also in the zoo community. So that was it. So far, we haven't got any more questions. So I don't know if you want to, David, I know you have a slide just to share. We have some resources available for those who would want them. So I don't know if you could just share that now. And while David does that, it would be great if you have any further questions, please write them in the Q&A. I have also written my email in the chat. So if you don't, for some reason, want to share the questions here, please feel free also to email me and we'll make sure to answer your questions. Or if you have any more feedback on the questions that Gustav had there in his presentation. We would love to get more feedback on how we can help and support to incorporate this in national conservation efforts, what challenges you see in adding Pallas cats, and what benefits you see as well of adding Pallas cat in national action plans. So please provide us more feedback. That would be very much appreciated. David.
Thank you, Emma. Let me just try and share my screen once again. Okay, so I'm just going to, for those of you that haven't seen the Pallas cat status review conservation strategy, I thought I would just show you that this is what it looks like. As I mentioned previously, this was published as a special issue of the IUCN Cat News publication, and like I said previously, this is the most extensive assessment of Pallas cat research over the last few years. This is an image of the meeting that we held in Sweden that brought together many of the world's leading researchers and specialists of Pallas cats, coordinated by the chairs of the IUCN Cat Specialist Group. So this document is available, and I know Emma's already put our contact details and the link to that document in the chat group for anybody that would like it. We do have other documents or other materials available that as a project we designed with the sole purpose of sharing with individuals or networks or projects or researchers working across range countries. And these materials that I'm showing you just now are clearly focused on improving education and awareness of people living in range countries and communities where Pallas cats could be present. This is one of the leaflets that we had designed, and that we've been able to provide to people working in Kyrgyzstan for this example, which is printed in Kyrgyz. And we have these materials translated into most of the range countries, most of the Pallas cat range countries. If you're on this webinar from a country and you're wondering if we have these materials in your language, then please get in touch. The chances are that we probably do, and we would be happy to provide you with PDFs. But also, if we don't, and it's one of the very few countries that we don't have the materials translated into, then we would be happy to get that done so that we could then provide you with PDFs if you wanted to print these materials and share them within communities for your country. So we have some resources available, and please just get in touch with Emma if you would like to learn more or receive PDF versions of these materials.
And also already you can go, I wrote in the chat, so visit, we have a PICA webpage, which is www.pallascat.org. And there you can find lots of other resources as well as most of the education materials. I know some of them we've recently produced in some of the languages, so we haven't yet had time to upload them on the website. So if you don't find your specific language there, please just contact us and we will make sure to send you the PDF so you can use them whenever you need. Okay, so it doesn't seem to be any more questions coming in. I've been trying to check all the chats, but if there's no other questions coming in, I think it's time for us to wrap it up. I don't know if anyone of the panelists have anything more to add before ending this session.
Maybe I'll just also two things. We do have the information kiosk, I think you call it, or maybe it's called a knowledge kiosk on the official GSLEP platform. You will find a PDF there of the status review and the global conservation plan. There is also a link to our webpage there if you didn't have time to write it down. The knowledge kiosk on the main platform to find more information about the Pika, more information about snow leopards. Then also I just want to sort of link back to that. There was that one question about GSLEP and linking the Pallas cats to there. And sort of, again, is from our point of view, thank GSLEP for allowing us to have this meeting or inviting us to have this meeting here. It's great to connect with all of you. And GSLEP, of course, is a unique and fantastic organization. And for us to kind of join on there of course, is very beneficial for the Pallas cat. And then also, if you look at from the point of view of GSLEP, of course, focusing on snow leopards, but also having a holistic approach, looking at the whole ecosystem, including people and livelihoods. So adding another sort of indicator species there, like the Pallas cats, is also beneficial for GSLEP. So I just wanted to lift that. And if Kasia or David also have something to add, but yeah, again, it's a pleasure to be able to meet with you here today, and we're very grateful for GSLEP for organizing this.
Yes, I was just also going to add that we also produced a little short summary of the main findings from the status review and conservation strategy. So if you wanted to see just a little snapshot of it, it's also in our knowledge kiosk, as well as some information on the species. And also thank you for having us and allowing us this opportunity.
Yes, I will once again just like the others say a big thank you to GSLEP, a big thank you to Gustub for helping us set this platform up. And as Gustav says, I think the potential for GSLEP to be a really important and influential platform to support and advocate for Pallas cat conservation and knowledge and information exchange is obvious. So a huge thank you to GSLEP, and perhaps this could be a model for many other cat species, where you have a large cat species living alongside a small cat species. So perhaps the relationship between snow leopard and Pallas cat could be something that could be replicated for other countries across the world, and to benefit other conservation actions for similar species. So very exciting times, but a big thank you from me.
Yeah, and I can only just say the same as my fellow Pika colleagues, that it's been fantastic, and thank you for this opportunity. We got a final comment here, is that the Pallas cat is very cuddly, as it is, and we all agree on that. And a possible mean for funding could be selling merchandise globally, and I couldn't agree more. I would have everything Pallas cat related, buy everything Pallas cat related.
Same here.
So that is a good suggestion indeed. But with that, it's time to wrap up this session. Again, big thank you. Thank you for all your questions and all your feedback. If you have any follow-up question, please feel free to contact us on email. I wrote my email in the chat. There's also on the knowledge kiosk, you can find our kind of general Pika email, which should come to all of us. And please visit the knowledge kiosk as well to get more information, or our website, which is pallascat.org. Finally, big thank you to GSLEP for giving us the opportunity to present and talk here about, in this venue, about the Pallas cat and the future we see it with working together, Pallas cat and snow leopard conservation. And as we've said, this is just our first introduction, and we hope to be able to meet all of you in the near future and continue these discussions. And yes, big thank you. So with that, I say take care and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.